That was an awful nice introduction by Steve, Dr. Little. He's a good friend and a great person. Just got called as a stake president, so he's very, very busy, and he's traveling tomorrow, so he had to step out, and he's a great guy. Okay, so here's the title of what I'm going to talk about today: Entrepreneurship, the answer to the crisis in higher education and the robotic threat. You ready for this? This is going to be interesting. I'm going to deliver some information today that's going to kind of maybe take some of you on a 90-degree course change. That's a lot to do in a few minutes, isn't it? So we'll see what happens. Okay, first of all, in looking at this topic, I want to tell you a little bit about me so I get some street cred. Again, my name's John Richards, and here's a little bit about me. And so I'm an entrepreneur, and I've had lots of entrepreneurial ventures. First of all, I had a yellow page print company, as Dr. Little said, called Banana Pages up in Seattle, Washington. What a weird name, right? So it was actually very successful. What I did was I found out that Yellow Pages was too generic of a term, and I swapped the name Yellow with Banana, and it grew my company about 5x. And the rest of the industry followed it. Who's heard of Smart Pages, Super Pages, all of that? They were all called Yellow Pages before I did this. And all the big Bell companies, the telephone company, copied it. Kind of interesting because it became uncool to be a Yellow Pages and you had to be something else, like US West was Directory Experts or DEX. You guys have heard of this stuff? Yeah. Okay. So I like to innovate and do different things. I was one of the first publishers to do 4-color ads on printed paper instead of just black ink on yellow paper. We used white paper and put a yellow mask over it, and they did 4-color printing inside the ads and did things like that. That also increased revenues about 300% when I did that. And so lots of interesting things. Then I said, hey, it was late 94 and somebody showed me the internet, 1994, and I go, holy mackerel, this thing's going to wipe out Yellow Pages someday. You mean everybody in their home and offices is going to be connected to the same network? Now see, I had a database of computers at my company where I could look up Yellow Pages and White Pages data at my desk because I was a Yellow Pages and White Pages company. But I was being told this thing's coming and everybody's going to be connected to a system like that and all the information in the world is going to be on it. Everybody didn't believe it at that time. But in 1995, I launched my online version of what I was doing. And then I said, hey, if I can do this, why not get everybody in the industry to do it with me? So I created a consortium where all the print publishers would sell advertising in their print books and then sell an add-on ad on my online version. And that went really well. Called that Yellow Pages on the Internet. And then that was purchased by a Microsoft guy and 2 coders that were leaving Microsoft after I spent a year thinking Microsoft was going to buy me. Then instead I merged in with these guys and the company InfoSpace was born. And InfoSpace went public in 1998. So I was number 4 with these 3 Microsoft guys when I merged in with them. And it went public and was a crazy, wild ride. Matter of fact, to this day, InfoSpace has the dubious honor of being the highest price-to-sales ratio in the history of the American stock market. That means if you take the stock price and divide it by the sales of the company, no company had a higher stock ratio than in that category. Now that's an interesting and dubious honor, but it was nice. I retired in 2001, and BYU called me up 6 months into retirement. I was up in Seattle and said, if you're not going to do anything, how would you like to come teach? So people not doing things end up teaching. Okay? So I could tell you a lot more about that story, but that's my entrepreneurial background. Done lots of other things too. I'm not going to tell you about all of them, but that was the main big one. When you go public, it's kind of an interesting experience. So then I also became an investor. So I became an investor mentor, what we call an angel investor, investing in other entrepreneurs. I've done 65 direct investments into startup companies and hundreds of other investments indirectly through what we call venture funds. So you've probably heard of those. And so, like, for instance, I met Josh and John, the two founders of Omniture, when they were just like you, students at BYU, and I flew down from Seattle. I met with them in a dingy office on the second floor of a building on Center Street in Provo, and I gave them $110,000. And that was a very good thing to do. Fast forward a few years, and the company went public, and then Adobe bought it for $2.2 billion. No, excuse me, $1.8 billion. It's Vivint that sold for $2.2 billion, supposedly. Okay, so we did that, and so you kind of invest, and you see all these different companies. Allegiance is another student from BYU named Adam Edmonds, and he was running around in this building and not knowing what he was doing, and we sat down one day, and I taught him what to do, and 10 years later, meaning last fall, he sold to Marriott, this company, I don't know, for around $100 million. Then I've been investing in funds like Mercado. Mercado is a Utah-based fund that its companies included, it invested in Skull Candy, Fusion.io. Anybody heard of these companies? Things like that. Very, very successful. And then I just invested in lots of others. So that's kind of my investing history. Now, I'm an educator now as well. And so what I've done is I've taught at BYU. Oops. I don't know why they're not showing up, but they're not. The logos for the universities, maybe that's on here. They filter them out. I don't know what's going on. But what's supposed to be here is BYU and UVU are two universities I've taught at, and I've lectured at many others. So that's a little bit about me. Okay, so now with that said, my latest venture is also in the education space, and it is called Startup Ignition. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how this fits later, but this is my latest venture that I'm doing. Instead of teaching at a university now, I've started my own school. And it's a school for entrepreneurs. And it's right here in Provo. And I wasn't sure how it was going to do, and it's going really, really well. So what I like about it is that I'm not constrained by the bureaucracy and some of the weight and the expense structure and the tenure system and a whole bunch of other things that weigh down universities. And so it's really been a fun project for the last few months, and it's really actually freed me up to really do the kind of teaching I like to do. So it's really fun. Okay, now with that introduction, we're going to get into some topics. The first one we're going to talk about is a crisis in higher education. Have you heard about this, that there's a crisis in higher education? Anybody heard about this at all? Do you know what that means even? Okay, well let's talk about my Yellow Pages. What happened to the Yellow Page industry? I had a print company that I sold in 1996 as I was getting the internet. And why did I sell it? Because I said, in a few years, this thing's going to be worthless. Why is it going to be worthless? Because the print book is a two-dimensional database printed once a year. The day it's printed, it's already 3-year-old data, or 3-month-old data. Why is it 3-month-old data? Because you have to say, boom, I'm stopping my data updates. I'm going to take the data file and put it into a print file and organize the print book, and it takes about 3 months to design it, get it printed, and get it distributed. So the day that arrives on your porch, it's months-old data. But the day I said I'm going to stop changing the data and push it to print, the next day, were there businesses that went out of business and businesses that started up? And so they're 3 or 4 month old businesses, not even in the upcoming phone book. But if everybody's got a persistently connected, fairly fast, always on device that can access the database, do you need the print book? Let me ask this question. How many in the last 30 days have opened up a Yellow Pages to look for a business? Raise your hand. Hi. Hi, let's see them all. 1. Raise it up. Anybody else? 1? What did you look up?
I forgot.
Something. You're the first person in years to raise your hand. Seriously, at BYU for me. And you can't remember what you looked up. How many have used Google search in the last 24 hours? Look at your hands. Google search has completely obliterated the Yellow Pages industry. Is it better than the print phone book? Absolutely. I saw that coming years beforehand. I sold my company for 5 times its gross margin, which is a good margin. You might not know what that means, a good valuation. That means revenue minus cost of goods sold equals gross margin minus expenses equals net income. Okay? I sold mine for 5 times the gross margin. Today, if I had a company like that and I wanted to sell it and I could find a buyer, which would be very, 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 very difficult, I might get 1.5 times the net income. And if you're below 3 times net income, people are basically saying that is such a bad company, I'll steal it from you. Yellow Pages industry is completely done, and it's only surviving because there's about 5 or 10 types of businesses that still advertise in it. Personal injury attorneys, plumbers, auto mechanics, auto body rebuild, a handful. Interesting, huh? Well, what about the crisis in higher education? Is technology affecting education? So that's where this crisis is coming from. And we're going to talk about it just a little bit. Time Magazine and MIT, in their technology review a couple years ago, almost simultaneously came out with major reports on the crisis in higher education. And it's for real. Lots of stuff that we could talk about on this. I'm going to tell you that this crisis has big import to you and your timing at being at school and coming out of school. Now, first of all, this has been recognized for a number of years. Matter of fact, in 2010, 2011, Clayton Christensen and Henry Eyring, the son of President Eyring, collaborated on a book called The Innovative University and called out the crisis and that there's a big problem coming in the way people are educated and the value of an education. And they called out and they wrote this book and they recommended things that universities can do to avert the problem or at least mitigate it. But since then, none of them have done it. This is an interesting thing, but it's completely consistent with Clayton Christensen. If you don't know who Clayton Christensen is, and Henry Eyring, but Clayton Christensen, he is an LDS Harvard business professor that changed the business world in the 1990s with major research on why incumbent leaders collapse and fail when a disruptive technology and a disruptive company come to the market. So the leader is going along, dominating, and a disruptive technology comes, and the leader ignores the problem until the disruptive technology and company becomes so powerful they completely steal the market away. This happens in every industry and repeats itself every 10 to 20 years in almost every niche and industry. And there's absolutely almost nothing the incumbent can do to stop it. And that is what's facing higher education right now. So let's talk and look at 2 noted PhDs and listen to a minute or two of them talking about recognizing this problem and addressing it. And it's kind of funny because this is one of the smartest men in the world who identified this pattern and changed the way we look at business forever. But because he's a PhD professor, and so is he, they want to persist this model and help it survive. But the chances of survival, according to his theories, which he discovered, are almost nil. Interesting, huh? Let's hear this. Does this ever work to try to save it?
We'd also like to prevent disruption of these great traditional colleges and universities, which do things that are invaluable, but have got so many things tied together, research tied to the undergraduate instruction, that if their tuition revenues were to fall off too far and their state subsidies were to diminish, we could
by coming into the market with a better product, but rather it's somebody that comes at the bottom of the market, actually with a product that's not as good as the leaders are making. But this one is just a lot simpler, a lot more affordable, so that a much larger population of customers can now own it and use it.
We think that what's happening for the first time in over a century is that online learning is a disruptive technology that is allowing this kind of entry in the market at the bottom of the market that Clay describes and is documented so well. And in the beginning, looked very inferior. In fact, was in most ways very inferior to what was happening in traditional colleges and universities. But it's getting better, and it's much less expensive, not least because you don't have the brick and mortar. But it's not just the expense to the provider, it's the expense to the consumer, who has to give up a job in their place of residence and move to a traditional college campus. When you combine those two things, the very much lower cost of delivery and the lower cost of attendance at the university, you're talking about an order of magnitude cost advantage.
Reading The Innovators Dilemma, Clayton Christensen's book from the mid-90s, should be a must-read for everybody in this room to understand cycles in business and success and failure that is inevitable. It's really important if you want to be successful and wealthy and on top of your game. And it's really interesting what's going on here. Matter of fact, there's some concerns. This video by those two was made 4 years ago. Not a single university is reacting properly to this coming problem. Matter of fact, just this year, universities for the first time are dropping tuition because they can't attract students. The Entrepreneurial Marketplace is coming up with solutions for education that are beating universities at a much lower cost. Fascinating. Fascinating. And so let's look at some of the history here. Universities continue to take 10% rate increases a year in tuition, even though their students coming out are not getting jobs. The last 3 years, less than 50% of all graduates get a job in their field of major. Those more than half that are graduating are getting jobs averaging $19,500 annual salaries, which means they can't even make payments against the debt they incurred from going to school. It's not good statistics. Now, if you look at this, the debt loads are increasing. These are all adjusted dollars to 2011 dollars. So they're all adjusted to a fixed point in time, so it's not because of just a dollar being worth a different amount due to inflation. These are all inflation adjusted. Okay? So there's been real increases in debt and soaring tuition costs. But now you're seeing, just in 2015, some colleges and universities having to do something desperate in order to do something. Now, I looked it up for BYU. BYU obviously has an advantage. 80% of your tuition cost is subsidized by the tithing of the LDS Church. So there's an insulation here that you aren't seeing. But if you're a liberal arts college where you charge $100,000 for somebody to get a 4-year degree and they can't get a job after that, and the person took out $150,000 in debt in order to go there, do you see the problem? It's a big problem. Matter of fact, there's over $1 trillion in student debt owed in this nation, and less than half of it is getting payments made against it. This is almost as big as the mortgage crisis of 2007. So there's some real issues here. Now, BYU, though, and the students come out with a lot less debt and aren't quite as serious of a problem, which is good news for BYU, right? And most of the Utah universities are ahead of a lot of other places, so that's really good. Now, let me share with you this. This may be one of the most important slides that you'll see today. This is the value of having different types of degrees and achievements in education and what it means to your expected lifetime earnings. In 2011 dollars, adjusted, what you can expect to earn. So for instance, on the very left, it's saying if you did not graduate from high school, from now until retirement, you can expect to earn $1 million over your lifetime. If you go and get the high school degree, you get a 40% bump, $1.4 million that you'll earn over that. If you get a little bit of college, you get a 1.6, associate's degree where you get the 2-year degree, 1.8, but getting the bachelor's degree gets you to 2.4. So there's still $1 million lifetime earning bonus getting that bachelor's degree from just having a high school degree on average. Now, going and getting a master's degree gets you a little bit more, a doctoral degree significantly more, and then a professional degree, lawyer, doctor, okay, gets you more. And you earn much more over your life. Now, the funny thing about this chart, to me, what do you think? Why would I snicker at this chart?
A lot of entrepreneurs don't graduate from college and make $1 million.
Who's saying that? I can't see. Oh, there you are.
A lot of entrepreneurs never graduate college and have made $1 million after the first year they started.
Yep. My son's 27. He barely got his degree here at BYU. Started a company 2 years ago. The company's worth almost $10 million. So the real funny part about this is that in the friends I hang around with and the people that I associate with, all of these numbers are rounding errors in their lifetime earnings. I have a group of people I travel with. In January, we're going to New Zealand and Australia, and then in February, we're going to Antarctica and Argentina and doing this. And that group, if they saw these numbers, they just kind of snicker. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing to feel that way? All I can tell you is that when you learn how the other side of the world works and what's out there, working for the man and marching to the corporate structure becomes very, very interesting to take a look at. So, still pays to go to college and get these degrees. You're seeing that. How long that will last for, I don't know. When disruption happens, it tends to happen rather rapidly, slow at first, and then falls off a cliff. So we'll see when that happens. We'll see what happens to your time until your children go to college and what's going to happen and the value of it. Now, let's talk a little bit more on your job and career prospects. First of all, I shared a little bit about this. The millennials, the Generation Y jobs, all of those most likely hold low-paying retail positions. If you don't get a degree in the right major and don't get your skills in the right area, you could be relegated to very low-paying service jobs. I'll have some stories about that in just a little bit, if I remember to tell them. This is a serious thing. You need to really soak this in and start making a 5-year plan. Where do you want to be in 5 years? What do you want to achieve? Where do you want to go? The good news is this: anything is possible. But if you just fall into a pattern and go into the river, I'm not going to call it the dirty river, and just go with the flow down that river, you could wake up one day very surprised at where you are and not where you thought you would be. Now, I'm going to talk about what the for-profit entrepreneurial world is doing to react to this crisis in higher education, since the universities aren't reacting quick enough. And that is, they're forming alternative types of education that are outperforming universities. We call these modern day boot camps. Some of them are hybrid models with online learning, like Clayton Christensen and Henry Eyring were talking about. You can Google this term and the boot camp phenomenon or the rise of the boot camp. And you're going to see that right here in Provo is a hotbed for these. The coding boot camp is the first example. It's been known for 15 plus years that the computer science program, for instance, here at BYU, UVU, University of Utah, do not produce the kind of software engineers and coders that companies will hire. You can get a 4-year degree in CS from BYU and be unemployable by Adobe, Domo, Symantec, and all the companies here in Utah. Isn't that shocking? But you can spend around $10,000 on a 12-week boot camp, and these boot camps have nearly 100% placement in jobs that start anywhere from $55,000 to $85,000. There's a boot camp here in Provo. That's the company started by my son, by the way. I went to their second class they ever held, and there was a very attractive female student that was in the graduating class, and I walked up to her and I said, "Tell me your story. What are you doing here?" It's kind of not a good thing to say the way I said it. I corrected myself after and said, "Oh, sorry for saying it that way. I didn't mean it the way it sounded." And then she goes, "Oh, let me tell you my story. I got an economics degree from BYU, spent a year looking for a job in Utah. I was just about to throw in the towel. I was going to go back and live with my parents in Wisconsin, take a waitress job, and see what was going to happen. And I saw an ad for Dev Mountain, a coder boot camp. And I said, well, I like computers. I've thought about computers and programming. So I said, I scraped up the money. At that time, it was $4,500 tuition. I scraped up the money. I took the class. And I go, well, what happened? You're here tonight. They've invited a bunch of employers here to see your skills. She goes, well, about 6 weeks into the 12 weeks, I had 3 job offers. I go, you did? So what happened? What'd you do? I took one of them. When do you start? Next Monday. After graduation's today, I start next Monday. And I go, and can I ask what your salary's going to be? $65,000. Oh, really? She goes, yeah, this is awesome. Dev Mountain's put out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students since then. It's very big, successful, and this has repeated itself time and time again. And this is a phenomenon sweeping the globe. These are all over the world now. And it's come up in the last 2 years. It's the marketplace's reaction to this disruption coming in higher education, and the incumbent leader, the traditional university, not moving with the times and adjusting itself. Now, when you read Clayton Christensen's book, this is normal. It happens all the time. Microsoft displaced Digital Equipment Corporation. Who's ever heard of Digital Equipment and DEC in here? None of you probably. Only somebody over age 30 or 40. All right, sorry to say that about you. Okay. Digital Equipment Corporation in 1980 was called on the cover of Forbes Business Week the most successful company in the world with the best management team in the world. The same leaders in 1990 took the company into bankruptcy, and it went away into nothing 10 years later because of Microsoft and the PCs. And then Microsoft, since the year 2000, its stock has barely moved because of Google. And I can tell you, in about 10 years from now, somebody out of a garage, one of you, is going to make Google go down. And it's going to happen. And I just saw, I think, some fist pumps. It's going to be you two. Is that right? Why not? Okay? And it's going to happen. So this is going on right before your eyes, and you're living in the middle of this happening to higher education. It's kind of interesting. So today's phenomenon, let's talk about this. What's happening right here in Provo? So this is like a computer science degree. Do you need that to get a job? Well, it turns out no. Because employers don't care about your grades. They don't care about, only want to care about your grades if you're going to go on to advanced education for another degree. Some old-fashioned employers still might have you fill out your GPA on a piece of paper in an application. And that's only so they can put you in a wastebasket versus keeping. So they'll keep everybody over 3.8 and throw everybody else away. But after that moment, you'll never get asked about your GPA or your grades again for the rest of your life if you go into the work world. So they want to know what you can do. This computer science degree ends up that you could have a coder boot camp in 12 weeks, give you the skills that make you more employable. But is this the only area? Well, the next one to fall here locally was actually in the area of marketing. Here in the Marriott School, which is a top business school, they do very little training on digital marketing. They don't even barely know what growth hacking is, viral coefficients, and how you build viral loops into your product to get better results. Growth hacking is about a 2 to 2.5-year-old discipline. The problem with the traditional education world is that if I want to write a book and get into a marketing class, it takes 3 years to write the book and get into a class. Where do you think digital marketing is going to be 2 years from now? And where was it 2 years ago? See the problem? So, top experts in the field started Market Campus right in downtown Provo. Wildly successful, more than a year ago. 9 weeks, $2,800 tuition. You take that course, you can get a really good job. Corporations and everybody is starving for people with digital marketing skills. Okay, so what I came across is, what about business management degree with an emphasis on entrepreneurship? Well, so I started Startup Ignition, and you can get the message from here. Okay, let's talk about the future a little bit. And the future, and gosh, I've got to get going, so I'm going to go really fast now. And I hope you'll give me 1 or 2 extra minutes because I'm running over. This is really interesting. Time magazine came out with an article a couple decades ago, and they predicted the future of the world in terms of population, and this is important to understand. So I'd ask you this. At the time they wrote this, it was 6 billion. It's now about 7 billion, and they predicted when it would be 12 billion, double the 6 billion. When do you think it will hit 12 billion population on Earth? Guess, real quick.
2025.
2025? 2050. Anybody else? 2025, 2050? 2030. Never. It's going to go to 9 billion and then back down to 6 billion. Why? Urbanization. 120 years ago and before, the more children you had, and the more land you had, and the more agricultural products you could produce, the richer you were. Almost everybody had to work all day long to put food on the table and grow food and make food to survive. It's not that way anymore, is it? Not that way at all. There's no advantage to having lots of children financially. If you live in an urban area, you're at a distinct advantage to have no children. Children bring you no wealth financially. This is really challenging for LDS people that want to live in Chicago or an urban area. The temptation to be a double income family is going to be immense just to get by. It's going to be challenging, isn't it? It's going to be much harder. My wife never worked. I was real lucky. It'd be really hard to pull off nowadays. All right, here's what I want to show you. I'm going to talk about robots. The robots are coming for you. Let's talk about this.
Every human used to have to hunt or gather to survive, but humans are smart, we're lazy, so we made tools to make our work easier. From sticks to plows to tractors, we've gone from everyone needing to make food to modern agriculture with almost no one needing to make food. And yet, we still have abundance. Of course, it's not just farming, it's everything. We've spent the last several thousand years building tools to reduce physical labor of all
Just turn it down just a little bit.
These are mechanical muscles, stronger, more reliable, and more tireless than human muscles ever could be. And that's a good thing. Replacing human labor with mechanical muscles frees people to specialize, and that leaves everyone better off, even those still doing physical labor. This is how economies grow and standards of living rise. Some people have specialized to be programmers and engineers whose job is to build mechanical minds. Just as mechanical muscles make human labor less in demand, so are mechanical minds making human brain labor is an economic revolution. You may think we've been here before, but we haven't. This time is different. When you think of automation, you probably think of this: giant, custom-built, expensive, efficient, but really dumb robots blind to the world and their own work. They were a scary kind of automation, but they haven't taken over the world because they're only cost-effective in narrow situations. But they're the old kind of automation. This is the new kind. Meet Baxter. Unlike these things, which require skilled operators and technicians and millions of dollars, Baxter has vision and can learn what you want him to do by watching you do it. And he costs less than the average annual salary of a human worker. Unlike his older brothers, he isn't pre-programmed for one specific job. He can do whatever work is within the reach of his arms. Baxter is what might be thought of as a general-purpose robot, and general purpose is a big deal. Think computers. They too started out as highly custom and highly expensive, but when cheap-ish general-purpose computers appeared, they quickly became vital to everything. A general-purpose computer can just as easily calculate change, or assign seats on an airplane, or play a game, or do anything just by swapping its software. And this huge demand for computers of all kinds is what makes them both more powerful and cheaper every year. Baxter today is the computer of the 1980s. He's not the apex, but the beginning. Even if Baxter is slow, his hourly cost is pennies worth of electricity, while his meat-based competition costs the minimum wage. A tenth the speed is still cost-effective when it's 100th the price. And while Baxter isn't as smart as some of the other things we will talk about, he's smart enough to take over many low-skilled jobs. And we've already seen how dumber robots than Baxter can replace jobs. In new supermarkets, what used to be 30 humans is now one human overseeing 30 cashier robots. Or take the hundreds of thousands of baristas employed worldwide. There's a barista robot coming for them. Sure, maybe your guy makes the double mocha whatever just perfect and you'd never trust anyone else, but millions of people don't care and just want a decent cup of coffee. Oh, and by the way, this robot is actually a giant network of robots that remembers who you are and how you like your coffee no matter where you are. Pretty convenient. We think of technological change as the fancy new expensive stuff, but the real change comes from last decade stuff getting cheaper and faster. That's what's happening to robots now. And because their mechanical minds are capable of decision-making, they are out-competing humans for jobs in a way no pure mechanical muscle ever could. Imagine a pair of horses in the early 1900s talking about technology. One worries all these new mechanical muscles will make horses unnecessary. The other reminds him that everything so far has made their lives easier. Remember all that farm work? Remember running from coast to coast delivering mail? Remember riding into battle? All terrible. These new city jobs are pretty cushy, and with so many humans in the cities, there will be more jobs for horses than ever. Even if this car thingy takes off, you might say, there will be new jobs for horses we can't imagine. But you, dear viewer, from beyond 2000, know what happened. There are still working horses, but nothing like before. The horse population peaked in 1915. From that point on, it was nothing but down. There isn't a rule of economics that says better technology makes more better jobs for horses. It sounds shockingly dumb to even say that out loud, but swap horses for humans and suddenly people think it sounds about right. As mechanical muscles push horses out of the economy, mechanical minds will do the same to humans. Not immediately, not everywhere, but in large enough numbers and soon enough that it's going to be a huge problem if we're not prepared, and we're not prepared. You, like the second horse, may look at the state of technology now and think it can't possibly replace your job. But technology gets better, cheaper, and faster at a rate biology can't match. Just as the car was the beginning of the end for the horse, so now does the car show us the shape of things to come. Self-driving cars aren't the future. They're here and they work. Self-driving cars have traveled hundreds of thousands of miles up and down the California coast and through cities, all without human intervention. The question is not if they'll replace cars, but how quickly. They don't need to be perfect, they just need to be better than us. Human drivers, by the way, kill 40,000 people a year with cars just in the United States. Given that self-driving cars don't blink, don't text while driving, don't get sleepy or stupid, it's easy to see them being better than humans because they already are. Now, to describe self-driving cars as cars at all is like calling the first cars mechanical horses. Cars in all their forms are so much more than horses that using the name limits your thinking about what they can even do. Let's call self-driving cars what they really are. Autos, the solution to the transport objects from point A to point B problem. Traditional cars happen to be human-sized to transport humans, but tiny autos can work in warehouses and gigantic autos can work in pit lines. Moving stuff around is who knows how many jobs, but the transportation industry in the United States employs about 3 million people. Extrapolating worldwide, that's something like 70 million jobs at minimum. These jobs are over. The usual argument is that unions will prevent it, but history is filled with workers who fought technology that would replace them, and the workers always lose. Economics always wins, and there are huge incentives across wildly diverse industries to adopt autos. For many transportation companies, humans are about a third their total costs. That's just the straight salaries. Humans sleeping in their long-haul trucks cost time and money, accidents cost money, carelessness costs money. If you think insurance companies will be against it, guess what? Their perfect driver is one who pays their small premiums and never gets...
Can you give me a few extra minutes and it'll be worth it? I've got a punchline at the end here, okay? Just a couple extra minutes.
Robots changing society. But there are many other places in the economy where the same thing is happening, just less visibly. So it goes with autos, so it goes for everything. It's easy to look at autos and Baxters and think technology has always gotten rid of those skilled jobs we don't want people doing anyway. They'll get more skilled and do better educated jobs like they've always done. Even ignoring the problem of pushing 100 million additional people through higher education, white-collar work is no safe haven either. If your job is sitting in front of a screen and typing and clicking, like maybe you're supposed to be doing right now, the bots are coming for you too, buddy. Software bots are both intangible and way faster and cheaper than physical robots. Given that white-collar workers are, from a company's perspective, both more expensive and more numerous, the incentive to automate their work is greater than those skilled work. And that's just what automation engineers are for. These are skilled programmers whose entire job is to replace your job with a software bot. You may think even the world's smartest automation engineer could never make a bot to do your job, and you may be right, but the cutting edge of programming isn't super smart programmers writing bots, it's super smart programmers writing bots that teach themselves how to do things the programmer could never teach them to do. How that works is well beyond the scope of this video, but the bottom line is there are limited ways to show a bot a bunch of stuff to do, show the bot a bunch of correctly done stuff, and it can figure out how to do the job to be done. Even with just a goal and no knowledge of how to do it, the bot can still learn. Take the stock market, which in many ways is no longer a human endeavor. It's mostly bots that taught themselves to trade stocks, trading stocks with other bots that taught themselves. As a result, the floor of the New York Stock Exchange isn't filled with traders doing their day jobs anymore. It's largely a TV set. So bots have learned the market and bots have learned to write. If you picked up a newspaper lately, you've probably already read a story written by bots. There are companies that teach bots to write anything, sports stories, TPS reports, even say those quarterly reports that you write at work. Paperwork, decision-making, writing, a lot of human work falls into that category, and the demand for human mental labor in these areas is on the way down. But surely the professions are still safe for bots, yes?
Couple more seconds.
When you think lawyer, it's easy to think of trials, but the bulk of lawyering is actually drafting legal documents, predicting the likely outcome and impact of lawsuits, and something called discovery, which is where boxes of paperwork get dumped on the lawyers and they need to find the pattern with one out-of-place transaction among it all. This can be bot work. Discovery in particular is already not a human job in many law firms. Not because there isn't paperwork to go through, there's more of it than ever, but because clever research bots shift through millions of emails and memos and accounts.
Okay, because of time, I want to show you this, and then I'm going to have one slide to tell you what my message is today. But I want you to see this 30-second ad that just came out this week from IBM about its computer Watson that won on Jeopardy. Anybody remember that? Okay. That was at the end of that other video we're watching, but I want you to see what it's saying now that it does. And this is the world's best doctor, this computer, by the way. But let's watch this real quick.
Hello, Ken Jennings. I haven't seen you since that TV quiz show. Hello, Watson. You can see that? I can recognize people, analyze images, and watch movies. Well, I wrote a few books. Speaking tour, I've been helping people plan for retirement, and I help doctors identify cancer treatments. Is that all? I've recently learned Japanese. Yeah, I was being sarcastic. I haven't learned sarcasm yet. I can help with that.
So what's the message? Let's get to it right here, and I'll just finish by this. The takeaway from today is that you need to take charge, first of all, of your own life and where you want to go. But if this represented everyone, The blue-blooded at the top, those that are exceptionally smart, go on to advanced education, go to Harvard, go to Stanford, they're going to always have a place and a way to make top dollar. But there's the rest of us. And what's going to happen? This is an interesting question. What is going to happen? Well, the segment out here, the few that can be entrepreneurs and that will do it, I believe entrepreneurship is the answer to this coming problem. And let me tell you why. A lot of these people are going to be relegated to low-paying service jobs displaced by bots, whether they're soft bots or hard bots. And who knows what's going to happen to them. This was really an interesting point, and my hypothesis is this. Entrepreneurship is creating your own job, but it's much more. It's about owning and controlling the robots, automation, and other threats, leveraging them to your benefit instead of being displaced by them. This lecture series, you need to learn one important thing. It is way better to own the robots than to be displaced by the robots. Thanks for your time.